He found a mechanic's shop, started showing up. Every 2 weeks he drives 4 hours to Dallas and 4 hours back to collect Robert for his visit. He's never missed one. That, too, is something Serena never calculated. A handwritten envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Carol's handwriting, the same looping letters from Dylan's grade school holiday cards 20 years ago. I heard what happened in the courthouse. I should have done more than follow you to the parking lot. I'm sorry I didn't. You were always the right person to hold those keys. I read it once, put it in the drawer with Frank's letter and Mr. Carson's card. The first time I met Robert, he was 4 years old. Serena brought him for a summer visit. Designer clothes, dark sunglasses, the practiced composure of someone always managing how they appear. We exchanged a few polished sentences on the porch. Then Robert spotted me. He ran. Full sprint across the gravel, arms already open, shouting grandma like it was the only word he knew. I lifted him. Spun him once. Set him down. He looked back toward Serena's car, then up at me, completely open. Why doesn't Mommy come inside? I held him closer. Didn't answer. Serena got in the car. She drove away without saying goodbye to her son. December came. The doorbell rang at 6 in the morning. Dylan stood on the porch, thin, unshaved, hollow around the eyes, wearing the look of a man who had walked a very long way to get somewhere he should never have left. He said one word, "Mom." I opened the door wider. I'm sitting on the porch right now, coffee going cold in my hands. The same hills my great-grandfather watched every morning of his life spread out in front of me. And the keys are right here against my chest where they've always been. People ask me if it was worth it. Every time, I pause. Not from uncertainty, from the need to be honest about what the question actually means. Because it assumes there was another version of this story, one where I handed over the keys, signed whatever they put in front of me, moved somewhere smaller and quieter, and told myself I was being gracious. I've thought about that woman. I know exactly who she became. She spent the rest of her life getting smaller and calling it peace. So yes, every dollar, every sleepless night, every morning I brewed coffee for two and sat at that table alone. Worth it. Let me tell you what the end actually looked like. Not the version that sounds clean. The real one. The sanctions ruling came back for $40,000 in my favor, plus a public court record citing bad faith motivation. Dylan's partition lawsuit dissolved within 2 months. His own attorneys told him quietly it couldn't survive against a valid life estate, with that ruling attached. The new will stood exactly as written. Mr. Carson built in an annual review, documented ranch income, no sale attempts, no commercial leases. 10 years. After that, Dylan inherits everything outright. The conditions aren't a punishment. They're a test. One I believe he's going to pass. The investment consortium financing Serena's developer's third hotel ran standard due diligence on all business principles. Serena had been listed as co-principal in 2 of his LLCs since the marriage. Their legal team surfaced the sanctions ruling. A bad faith litigation finding against a named principal doesn't just raise eyebrows, it raises liability flags that make institutional investors walk toward the exit. The consortium came back with one condition: her name removed from all principal listings before they would sign. He agreed. She found out afterward. She got the money, she got the man and the first-class flights, and the life that photographs beautifully. What she couldn't get, what no amount of legal maneuvering can manufacture, is a permanent stake in anything that will outlast her. The third hotel opened. Her name isn't on the door. About 6 months after the ruling, a voicemail arrived from an unknown number. Her voice. Measured. Warm. Exactly calibrated. "Margaret, I hope there are no hard feelings between us. Robert's been asking about you. I just want what's best for everyone. I think we both do." I listened to the whole thing, then I pressed delete. That was the last time I heard. She didn't want reconciliation. She wanted to reopen a door, to establish that she still had the ability to move me even slightly, even by a text message, so she could hand that information to her lawyers if the custody terms ever became inconvenient. Complete indifference was the only honest response, and the only safe one. The healing didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly. the way good things usually do. Dylan moved back to town. Small apartment, mechanic's shop, steady work. He calls on Sundays now. Every 2 weeks, he makes the 8-hour round trip to Dallas without complaint and brings Robert to the ranch for his visit. He's never missed one. He sits on the same porch where we used to watch the light leave the hills, and he doesn't talk about what happened, not directly. He just shows up. That's the whole language of it. Showing up. Carol's note lives in the drawer beside Frank's letter and Mr. Carson's retirement card. 3 pieces of paper that between them contain everything worth knowing about what I went through and why. And Robert, 4 years old and running across the gravel with his arms wide open. That child carries Frank's name and Frank's eyes and absolutely none of the calculation that surrounded his arrival in my life. He doesn't know any of it. He just knows the ranch and the horses and that his grandmother always has hot chocolate on the porch. That's enough. That's everything. Now let me say the part that actually matters. I spent 2 years believing Serena was the problem. She was a problem calculated, patient, relentless. But she was the infection, not the wound. The wound was older than she was. I had raised my son to believe my love had no edges, not too much love. Love without architecture. 20 years of absorbing everything, his distance, his borrowed vocabulary, his new way of looking at the house where he grew up, as though pricing it and still being at the kitchen table the next morning. I thought that was strength. It was an open door. And Serena, who had been reading rooms since the moment she walked into mine, walked straight through it. That's the first thing I want to say to you. Love without architecture isn't love. It's an invitation. The most dangerous signal any of us can send, mothers, partners, friends, anyone who loves without conditions, is that we have no edges, that we'll absorb anything and remain. When we do that, we're not proving love. We're proving we can be moved. And the people who want to move us are always watching for exactly that. Pressing those keys to my chest instead of dropping them into Dylan's palm wasn't choosing the ranch over my son. It was choosing to remain a person who could not be erased. Without knowing it, it was the first genuinely protective thing I had done for him in years. You can't love someone into their best self by endlessly absorbing their worst. Sometimes the most loving thing you can offer is the experience of a wall. The people who call you selfish are usually the ones who need you to be selfless. Watch the pattern in your own life. Who gets quieter when you get smaller? Who relaxes the moment you stop pushing back? Serena called me selfish every time I held a line. Dylan echoed it because she'd installed the word in him. But translate what was actually being said. You are selfish for refusing to hand over your home, your assets, your legal standing, your right to exist in your own life. Selfish. The word used to shame people out of self-preservation. Selfishness and self-respect are not the same thing. A woman who refuses to be removed from her own story is not selfish. She's paying attention. And the people who cannot tell those two things apart are the people you should stop explaining yourself to. Patience is not passivity. It is precision. I won because I waited. I held my position while Serena built her case, and I let every move get made in writing, in courtrooms, in a public record that will outlast her developer and his hotels by several decades. Frank used to say the land doesn't need you to defend it with yelling. It defends itself with time. I spent 15 years thinking he meant the ranch. He meant me. The strongest position in any conflict is the one where you never became something lesser to win it. The truth surfaced on its own. It surfaced in a courtroom, in a ruling nobody could spin or delete. In the moment, Serena's expression slipped for exactly 1 second, just long enough to show the face of someone who had finally run out of unlocked doors. There is a woman somewhere right now posting photographs of a perfect life. And somewhere in her quiet moments, if she has any, she knows what she lost. Not the ranch. The ranch was never really the point. She lost the one thing no capital or legal maneuvering can manufacture. A child who runs toward her. Robert runs across this yard every time Dylan brings him. Arms open. Grandma, like it's the only word that matters. She watched it once from a car window. She didn't get out. That's what I protected. Not adobe walls or oak trees. The right to be the person that child runs toward. My name is Margaret. I am 58 years old. I have buried a husband, almost lost a son, and spent years being called difficult by people who needed me to be easy. The keys are still around my neck. When Dylan is ready, truly ready, they'll find their way to him. Mr. Carson made sure the conditions are simple and fair. I didn't build a trap. I built a test. And I believe, watching him drive 8 hours every 2 weeks without once complaining, that he is going to pass it. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs permission to hold their ground. Sometimes the most important thing a story can do is land in front of the right person at exactly the right moment. Have you ever been called selfish for protecting something that was yours? A home, a decision, a version of yourself someone needed you to give up? Tell me what you decided. I read every single comment. God bless you. Until next time. Get out, Mom. My fiancé doesn't want you here. My own son said that. At his wedding. In front of 200 people. The music cut out. Every head in that hall swung toward us. Dylan, the boy I raised alone after his father died, who used to haul fencing tools heavier than he was just to make me proud, was pointing at the door. His bride stood behind him in white lace, hands folded, watching to see what I'd do. My name is Margaret, 58 years old. And for one long second, that whole room held its breath. So I turned toward those 200 people, neighbors, family, friends, people who had eaten at my table for 20 years, and I said something that made every single one of them go quiet. Then I picked up my purse and walked. This was only the beginning. My name is Margaret. I was 58 years old. I had buried a husband, raised a son alone, and kept 400 acres alive on black coffee and stubbornness for 15 years. That's the whole resume. Everything else you need to know lives in the land itself. Frank died when Dylan was 12. One week he was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, and the next week he wasn't. Just like that. And Dylan, this quiet boy with hands already too big for his age, looked at me the morning after the funeral and said, "I'm the man of the house now, Mom." He picked up the fencing tools the following day. The things were nearly heavier than he was. I let him carry them anyway. Not because I needed him to, because he needed to believe he could. We grew up together on that ranch, the two of us. I kept the accounts and argued with suppliers, and learned to read a balance sheet like it was a second language. Dylan learned the livestock, learned to negotiate, learned when to push and when to let the land rest. Evenings, we'd sit on the porch with coffee and watch the light bleed out of the hills. Those were the best hours of my life. I know that now in a way I didn't then. After college, he had options. Good ones. He came home anyway. "My place is here, Mom, with you." He meant it. Every word. He told me once that his kids were going to run these same yards someday, climb these same trees, learn to ride on these same horses. I believed him. There was no reason not to. Then he met Serena. Her car was expensive and quiet on the gravel. She walked through the front door, and her eyes moved across the room, like someone taking inventory. The dark wood furniture, the black and white photographs, the adobe walls, the color of dry earth. She stopped in the middle of the living room and said, "You live here?" Not curious, not impressed. Just that flat, final verdict, dressed up as a question. Dylan corrected her gently. "We live here. It's beautiful, isn't it?" She smiled. Her mouth agreed. Everything behind her eyes said something else entirely. After that first visit, the language in my house started to change. Words I'd never once heard from my son began appearing in his mouth like borrowed currency, realistic, modernize, productive, returns. Her vocabulary, filed down and installed in him so gradually that by the time I noticed, they almost sounded natural coming out of him. I noticed every single one. 15 years of managing this ranch alone, cattle contracts, drought seasons, suppliers who smiled while they shorted you, taught me one thing above everything else. You read the weather long before it arrives. The morning after the wedding, Dylan called. His voice was flat, practiced, like someone reading from a card someone else had written and slipped into his pocket. He said, "Serena had ideas about the ranch, about modernizing, about turning the property into something productive." He used that word like it was new, like he'd just discovered it. So I asked him one question. Where does the capital for the build-out come from? Silence. Long enough to tell me everything. The plan had never included Serena's own money, not a single dollar of it. The plan was to use my equity as collateral, take operational control, and collect profits from a property she'd been studying since the moment she first set foot on the gravel. Dylan didn't know that. He was just repeating lines he'd been handed. I invited them to dinner. Meatloaf, good china, the embroidered tablecloth I'd pulled out of the cedar chest. I wore beige. I said the words I didn't mean because I needed to watch what Serena would do when she had full access to the house. She called the decor quaint, took photographs of the living room for a cousin who apparently loved vintage, smiled at everything. Midway through dinner, I stepped into Frank's study to grab an extra serving spoon from the cabinet near the window. The door stayed open maybe 2 minutes. When I came back to the table, Serena was still smiling, still talking. She had already filed it. 20 minutes later, she excused herself to use the bathroom. She did not go to the bathroom. When I went to check on her, the study door was open, and she was standing with her back to me, phone raised, moving it slowly across the desk, the drawers, the stacked documents, the folded papers Frank had organized with his own hands, and never stopped being careful about. When she turned around, her expression was completely composed, not startled, not caught, just mid-sentence and rerouted. I thought I could come in. Sorry, I just love old things. Phone into the purse, smile back in place. She walked past me toward the dining room like she hadn't missed a single beat. The next morning, the yellow envelope was gone. 2 days later, Mr. Carson showed up without calling first. Serena had phoned him the previous day, claiming I'd authorized her to ask questions about the will. She'd wanted to know whether Dylan's 50% was transferable without my consent, whether the life estate clause had any expiration, whether there was a path around me entirely. He'd told her nothing and drove straight to my door. She thought I was a grieving woman, clinging to the past. She forgot I'd spent 15 years managing cattle contracts, land negotiations, and supplier disputes alone. I can recognize a leveraged takeover dressed as a family proposal. I've seen that handshake before, just never at my own kitchen table. Then came the lunch. Serena chose the restaurant. She was warm, measured, reasonable in the full performance. She laid out the partnership proposal across the table like it was a gift. Boutique event venue, shared profits, no more maintenance burden for me. Modern, practical, smart. Then she leaned forward slightly and said, "At your age, Margaret, you should be enjoying life, not killing yourself in a 19th century house. At your age." 3 words, pressed down like a thumb on a bruise. I picked up my water glass, took one slow sip, set it back down. Where does the build-out capital come from? The smile didn't fall immediately. But the answer did. There wasn't one. There had never been one, because the plan was never to invest anything. It was to leverage my equity, take my property, and hand me a percentage of my own land while removing me from every decision about it. One question, the whole architecture, gone. I put money on the table for my water and walked out without another word. 3 vehicles came up the road that afternoon. Dylan's truck first, then a second truck, 2 men climbing out with briefcases, and the particular stillness of people who've been paid to sit in uncomfortable rooms and say difficult things with neutral faces. Serena's car last. She stepped out dressed like she was arriving at a board meeting. I opened the door wider and said nothing. In the living room, one of the attorneys, Williams, grey suit, frameless glasses, laid documents across my coffee table and began to speak in the flat. Careful language of someone dismantling a life on paper. Deteriorating asset value. Non-productive use. Legal right of co-owner. Every phrase designed to sound inevitable. Like gravity. Like something that had already been decided before anyone walked through my door. Dylan stood at the window the entire time. Back to the room. Eyes on the oak trees outside. Then Serena set down her water glass and said, softly, that she was 3 months pregnant. Not at dinner, not privately, between family, mid-meeting, timed to the exact moment my composure might soften. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her voice was gentle. The timing was surgical. My eyes went to Dylan. "Did you ask for this?" He kept looking at the trees. The attorneys continued. A judge, they suggested, might look at my situation living alone, resisting assistance, refusing reasonable proposals, and see a pattern. The word they used was diminished. They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't need to. Mr. Carson had told me this was coming. He'd said it quietly, on my porch, with the kind of sadness you only get from 40 years of watching families destroy themselves over property lines and old wills. I stood up. This is my house. Everyone out. Dylan turned from the window. His face had transformed into something I didn't recognize. Red, jaw working, the grief of a man who had already crossed a line he couldn't walk back from. He crossed the room. His voice broke open. He demanded the keys. His inheritance. His future. He said the words that would live somewhere in my chest for a long time afterward. I took the necklace off, held the keys flat in my palm. His hand was extended, trembling. I pressed them against my chest instead. These keys are not your future, Dylan. They are your past. Until you understand the difference, you won't have them. His last words before he turned for the door. I don't have a mother. The attorneys left first. Then Serena. One backward glance. Composed. Unreadable. Then Dylan. He never looked back. 3 sets of tail lights disappeared up the dirt road, and the silence that followed was a different kind of silence than I'd ever known in that house. Mr. Carson knocked at midnight. He carried a yellowed envelope, a copy he'd made without telling Frank, 15 years earlier, because something in Frank's voice, the day he came to the office, made Mr. Carson's hands move toward the copier before his mind had fully decided to. Frank had been sick. He'd known it. He'd sat across the desk and dictated a letter handwritten, dated 3 weeks before he died, about a man he'd met in a hospital waiting room, a father whose daughter-in-law had convinced him to sign a power of attorney, who'd ended up in a nursing home while his son and his son's wife sold everything he'd built. Frank had written, "You are the door. You decide who can enter." I read it 3 times at the kitchen table. Then I walked to the study, opened the safe behind my father's portrait, placed the letter inside, and locked it. Then I picked up the phone. Weeks passed without a word from him. Then one morning, Dylan's truck came up the road. Alone. No Serena. No briefcases. He knocked instead of walking in, which told me something had shifted. He sat down at the kitchen table and looked at his hands for a long moment before he said anything. I made coffee, the same French roast I'd been making since he was 12 years old and trying to be the man of the house. "I'm sorry, Mom. I went too far." No long explanation. No itemized accounting of what he'd done wrong. Just that. I refilled his cup. We watched the sunrise through the kitchen window, the same window we'd watched 1,000 sunrises through. And for the first time in months, the house felt like it could breathe again. 2 weeks later, Mr. Carson called. "Margaret, Serena filed a guardianship petition. She's asking the court to declare you mentally incompetent. The hearing is already scheduled. She found a doctor." The petition letter arrived 3 days after that. I read every word carefully. Then I read it again. The property shows deferred maintenance consistent with inability to manage. Subject demonstrated confusion regarding dates. Social isolation observed. My stomach dropped. These weren't generalities pulled from a file somewhere. These were specific. The cracked fence post by the east gate that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. The unwashed coffee cups still on the counter when Dylan arrived that morning. The way I'd sat at the table staring at nothing while the coffee brewed. Details that only someone physically present that morning could have known. Serena had debriefed Dylan the moment he got home, filed every small observation straight to her legal team. The reconciliation visit, the coffee, the sunrise, the apology had been a data collection trip. Dylan hadn't known. He'd been used, same as always. I called Mr. Carson. 2 sentences. Save that letter. Every word of it. The doctor wasn't a stranger. His name was Dr. Harmon, my own GP, whom I'd seen once, 2 years earlier, for a sinus infection. 11 minutes total. Serena had gotten his name through Dylan months before and approached him quietly, framing the whole thing as a routine welfare check affidavit. A formality for a concerned family. Nothing serious. What her law firm had already mentioned to Dr. Harmon before the paperwork ever arrived on his desk was that they were aware of a billing compliance matter from 2021, not criminal. But the kind of thing that draws an investigation if the right people start asking questions at the wrong time. Dr. Harmon told himself the affidavit language was vague enough to be defensible. Social isolation consistent with possible cognitive rigidity. No clinical testing, no evaluation framework a real psychiatrist would recognize. He signed it anyway. The first hearing session came. Dr. Harmon testified. Mr. Carson listened without interrupting, taking careful notes on the gap between the affidavit's preparation date and the last time Dr. Harmon had actually seen me. 6 weeks passed. Mr. Carson subpoenaed the preparation records. The sequence came out clean and damning. Law firm contact first, billing matter reference second, affidavit drafted third. All of it documented. All of it time-stamped. Session 2. My own physician testified full cognitive and physical evaluation. Results better than most people 20 years younger. Mr. Carson laid out Frank's letter. Then he walked the court through the entire timeline. The unauthorized call to his office, the photographed documents, the simultaneously filed partition suit, the reconciliation visit that fed observations directly to opposing counsel. Every piece placed carefully beside the next. Then he called Dr. Harmon back to the stand. Dr. Harmon, before Serena's attorneys presented you with this affidavit, did they reference your 2021 billing compliance matter? The room went absolutely still. Dr. Harmon's eyes moved to the table in front of him. A long pause. The kind that answers the question before the words do. They may have referenced it. Mr. Carson closed his notebook. The judge read the ruling. Serena's attorney went rigid in his chair. Serena's expression held together carefully for 2 full sessions. Every line of it controlled, slipped for exactly 1 second. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes moved to the door, then snapped back to the judge's face like she was catching herself falling. Petition dismissed with prejudice. Bad faith motivation established. Petitioner ordered to pay respondents full legal costs, $40,000, and a public court record that would outlast every carefully curated photograph she'd ever posted. Mr. Carson folded the ruling copy into his briefcase, turned to me, and nodded once. No celebration, just that nod. On the drive home, I said it out loud, to no one in particular. I didn't destroy her reputation. She filed it in a courthouse. Courthouses are public. Dylan's own attorneys advised him quietly. The partition lawsuit had nowhere to go, not against a valid life estate, not with a bad faith ruling already attached to the public record. The case was withdrawn. The new will stood. Mr. Carson built in an annual review clause, documented ranch income, no sale attempts, no commercial leases, 10 years. Simple, measurable, fair. Carson built. After that, the ranch passes to Dylan completely. If he fails, it goes to Robert at 25. Mr. Carson retired that spring. He sent a card. 6 words. Your husband picked the right woman for those keys. I put it in the drawer beside Frank's letter. At the time of the ruling, Serena's developer was finalizing financing for a 3rd hotel through a regional investment consortium. Standard due diligence. Background checks on all named principals. Serena had been listed as co-principal in 2 of his LLCs since the marriage. The consortium's legal team pulled the sanctions ruling. A bad faith litigation finding against a named principal isn't a footnote. It's a liability flag that makes investors nervous and lawyers cautious. They came back with a revised term sheet. Serena's name removed from all principal listings. Condition of financing. Non-negotiable. He agreed. She found out after the fact. She got the money, the man, the first-class flights, and the profile photographs that look like a life. What she didn't get, what she can't recover, is a permanent stake in anything that will outlast her. The 3rd hotel was built. Her name isn't on it. The marriage to Dylan ended 4 months after the failed petition. He discovered her with the developer before the legal separation was even finalized. She took full custody and moved to Dallas. Dylan lost the job. He'd skipped a performance review for the trip Serena had told him wasn't worth attending. He found out 2 weeks after she left. 3 months in a cheap motel near the city, drinking alone. reduced to nothing by the exact choices she'd convinced him were necessary. Then he stopped.